Hi guys, this is Pilleater, and I'm joined with Alex Moskowitz. Yes,
Malejewicz.
Malejewicz. Okay, Alex from Australia. Awesome.
Yeah.
You have a Twitter and you have a WordPress blog called The Golden Russian, and
Yes.
it's interesting because on your Twitter it says you invest in physical gold and silver, but often on the topics you just consider yourself a neo Eurasianist or some kind
Yes.
of have an interest in the culture of Japan and of the Central Asian or Russian or. But you're also in Australia too, so I find that a very fascinating background. So tell me more about yourself.
Um, well, my my mother actually came to Australia from Canada. She's a Canadian national. She married my father in 1956, and my father was here already for about a decade before that.
Mm.
Yeah, how we ended up in Australia is just basically because the Russian Revolution happened, and both of my parents' families were pretty much sought after by the Bolsheviks for extermination, being of old Russian aristocratic lineage. But that's worth two dead flies in Australia.
Mm. Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, my background it's more of a mix of Irish and some Japanese, which is
Okay.
I'm in the American scene. I've only really I never really been to Europe, but I have been overseas to Asia and around in America. So it's kind of different for me, but I feel more Americanized than anything. But at the same time, I do have interesting roots of, a background in Japanese culture, and especially that
Yes.
there's this kind of mix in there because you as well talk about that. I think your wife's Japanese, and you
Yes.
talk about your daughters a lot on your blog.
Yes.
If I briefly glance
Right.
at.
Yes. Yeah, they're a prominent part of my life. I went to live in Japan about 20 years ago and worked in the financial community there. But I was always a lot more interested in culture and sociology and various things like that rather than finance. I find finance to be very boring personally, even though I work in the industry. It's much more interesting to see how people live in real time.
Oh yeah, I mean, I went to for a summer semester from an off campus near Japan to study, but I was mostly indoors in Tokyo and just taking a class in math and some of my Japanese. It's funny because like my Japanese is very elementary and kind of it's that's weird because it's like you come from something that's that background, but like I have an interest in it. I did go to school for Asian studies for about 2.5 years, but I just recently graduated with a degree actually in both English and communications as a double major. So it's weird because I didn't exactly go the path of getting Asian studies because I felt I don't know. It's something strange about the Asian studies department being more liberal and being
Yes.
especially biased, and it's more for definitely an Asian American thing, but at the same time
Yes.
a I don't know. I just find English more practical, or at least something. I don't know. I guess some people don't have the interest to go and learn these other cultures because people might as well major in economics or business or something.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. Well, my eldest doesn't speak Japanese very well at all, and my other three daughters are doing their best to forget Japanese and to learn English, and they're in Japan.
Uh,
So,
yeah, that's funny because it's once you. I always have a discussion this with my friends whether that if you're partially Japanese or even half, it seems to me you're allowed in the club or something
yeah,
like. And that's it's funny because I really passes. I usually like to
yeah,
self-identify as white, even though it's like if you look at me quite a bit, you'll be like, oh, you might be some Eurasian or you might be, which is funny because it's like I was telling this to my friends that like if you're Japanese, it's kind of like this exclusiveness core to if you're Chinese or even if you're Korean, it's this kind of
yeah,
special thing. I don't know how to describe it, and some of my friends go, Oh, it's the joke, the Jewish Asian joke, where it's like, no, the Chinese are the Jewish Asians. No, no, the Japanese are the Jewish Asians, as if this supremacy thing. I don't know how to really define it, but I know what you're talking about when, if even by partial, you're kind of allowed in this club thing. But
Oh, most definitely. There's an interesting racial classification. Um, I think it comes from South Africa, but it was also, in some ways, ruled by the US Supreme Court, where Japanese are considered to be white,
mm,
um, along with the French, whereas the Russians are considered to be a yellow race. And that was upheld by the Australian Department of Immigration until about 1995. So all these things are rather arbitrary. I definitely consider Japanese to be, for point and purpose, whites. Um, so does my wife, but she also believes that Japanese are one of the lost tribes of the Jews, believe it or not, and that actually is quite a common thing to believe in Japan.
or it's
Did you know about that?
I remember the tribes of the Ainu people. It's often
Yes,
said the Ainu are very closely related to some of the Russian or Europeans, but I know what you're talking about.
yes, yes. Yes, that's correct. I've also seen a study that the Ainu are genetically related to some of the local Australian Aborigines.
Hmm. That's
That's fascinating.
I don't know much of my genetics, but it's a very interesting thing to think about.
Yeah,
There's this guy we were talking in our Robert Stark podcast named Josh Jason Horsley, and
yes.
do you know Jason Horsley? We had him on the Stark Truth, and he says that genetics has a lot. If you're autistic, you kind of have a different genetic displacement, or at least I once again I really don't know the whole genetic argument, but pretty much it relates to how it's very similar to different people, and
Yeah,
yeah, I never was into the genetic thing, so I don't know what I'm talking about.
yeah. I'm only sort of quoting from articles that I've read over the last few decades. So yeah, I'm not too sure about this. Yeah, yeah. Just yeah. uh, I suppose it's interesting, yeah, for people that get into that.
But from what I've understand, since you're using the word Eurasian, often you talk at least about Alexander Dugin. Do you
Hmm.
find how much of Dugin is of influence, or do you find what's your views on Dugin?
I've only recently discovered him in the last few months. Gee, he's got some interesting backers. I'm a little bit suspicious. I don't think that he's as close to Putin as what the West makes out. I think he's a bit of a Western wedge in there as well. I'm just very, yeah, I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I never really had a thought with Dugin either. I mean, I know his Fourth Political Theory book and how he talks about this fourth political beyond communism and fascism, but he's also known for his whole Eurasian party in Central Asia that's uniting these people. It's some at the same time, my friends have been saying, yes, it might be white nationalists, but at the same time, they may be supporting a kind of pan-European Asian alliance or Eurasian alliance to that. But from what I've
Yeah,
understand, it sort of looks like that. But I really, once again, I'm not so aware of what Dugan states, and I don't know.
yeah, me neither. He doesn't come on my radar very often. I'm more of a there are other Russian academics that are more relevant, perhaps, to Russians. Yeah,
Hmm. Um, yeah, whatchamacallit. Do you know of Jared Taylor of American Renaissance?
most definitely. Yeah.
Mm.
Hmm.
Have you ever watched his debate he had with the Rug Man on the Gavin McInnes show?
I've seen a few Jared Taylor debates. I don't recall that particular one. I'm actually quite, yeah, I actually sort of like Mr. Jared Taylor quite a lot.
Oh yeah, I mean, believe it or not, in my one Asian studies class about the cliques in Japan, one of the books that was recommended by my professor was Shadows of the Rising Sun by Jared Taylor, his first book
Yes,
about his experiences in Japan and about his
yes,
argument between Japanese and other, non-Japanese. And I find that still a really good book, and actually that would eventually lead me to Jared Taylor from the most oddest possible. But at the same time, though, he speaks fluent Japanese and fluent French, so he knows his Asian culture and fluent in the whole Japanese background.
Yeah.
But the point is, on the Gavin McInnes show, the Rugged Man, the R.A. the Rugged Man, is this kind of white rapper who thinks he's black, and he's going and throwing names at Jared. And he says to Jared, throughout this hour insult, not even a debate, he says to Jared, "You whites and Asian people, you're suppressing us blacks and all other minorities. You two are the people who are going to oppress us, and you need to." But he kept using the point is, he kept using the word whites and Asians, as if
Yes.
whites and Asians, it's no longer white people, right? It's
Yes.
whites and Asians working as this mysterious coalition. I just think that's really funny, because I think that's the first time I've ever heard a complaint from the liberal oppressed minority that somehow Asians as well as whites are in it. You might as well, are you talking about some white Asian mix too, or is this super? I don't know. It's funny.
In Australia, the local Jewish community are very, very suspicious about the Asian influx into Australia. They see they're an entity that cannot be controlled by the Trotskyists or the Pharisee or the Talmudists, and that's possible. And remember, the blacks are always the cat's paw of certain interests, so perhaps that's why.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, especially the situation in America. I've said this before on different podcasts, but where I am in Philadelphia, especially in the upper, white neighborhoods, there is a lot of successful white businessmen with Chinese wives, or generally
Yes.
Asian. And I'm
Yes.
pretty much a part of that scene, and I consider that normative. And it's only in major cities. However, they put a blind spot on there and say, this has nothing to do with race. This is, a multicultural, diverse thing. It could have been anyone. And yet this influx of white male, Asian female, that's most likely happening, and Eurasian, white Asian offspring is becoming a thing, as I'm a part of that. And it
Yes.
happens to be in major cities in America, and everywhere else seems to be not like that. And yet, at the same time, these cliques are forming, and they're forming this small, upcoming Eurasian thing, which is once
Yes.
again not talked about.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. When I lived in China about more than 20 years ago now, the elites, the Western elites that sort of were the first ones to get that stock exchange up and running, they were all married to Chinese wives or Asian wives. Same thing in Hong Kong. I think you'll find the same thing in Melbourne and Sydney as well. It's an elite, and it's not by accident, and it is very much, it's not
Yeah,
an accident.
and it's funny because I just got out of college, but for 5 years of my life, you're told about liberal ideology, and we
Yes,
live in an era where you go on the internet and you get quote unquote red pill and the exposure of the alt right and all these things that completely contradict the universal blind egalitarian liberal ideology that assumes that all races have potential. When I strongly have believed, and I've written this before, and I might have got criticism by one or two professors, is that, look, I believe that on whites in a multicultural and diverse society are willing to discriminate and choose an Asian companion because that is the model minority. They will not choose black or Mexican or any other non-white. Not even, they will choose Asian because that is the benefit in the multicultural society. And unfortunately, it's not so much for blacks, because the alt-right has a joke for black people called "Gives Me Dat," meaning that in a
yeah,
multicultural environment, blacks are just going to get free stuff. They're not going to assimilate with whites. They're just going to, and even if they did assimilate with whites, they're still black, and they'll just create Black Lives Matter. It's so problematic for white and black relationships, yet at the same
yeah,
time, it's very progressive and going upwards for white and Asian relationships.
yes, yes. I completely agree with you. What can I say?
Yeah, I just think I'm reaching out to people like you because I think you can understand where I'm coming from. I mean,
Oh yeah,
especially if you call yourself neo-Eurasianist as a term. I use the term Asian-Aryan as this kind of poking term, or at least a
yeah,
blunt term, because I think, everyone in the alt-right's talking about an Aryan race, right? Make
yeah,
America, make the white race great again, make America great again. Then it's like, all right, there's also going to be this Asian Aryan people that's forming, even though no one wants to talk about it. It's there,
yeah,
but I like the term, but I also like Eurasian too, as that seems to be more
yeah.
calmer. Asian Aryan seems to be like in your face with the whole Aryan thing.
Well, I've actually stolen that neo-Eurasian term from Dugan himself. I kind of like it. I think
Hmm.
that neo-Eurasian is just a slightly more sort of, I don't know.
I've had this talk with Robert Stark before, and I said, well, if we're talking about Asian Aryan, are we talking about Central Asia, like Uzbekistan or Kazakhstan? I mean, they have very pretty women there too, depending. I mean, some of it mostly they don't have the traits of Japanese or Chinese. Or when I say Asian Aryan, or I am talking exclusively between white Americans and the Asians coming in and them happening in these upper classes around Europe and where you are, because I think
Yeah,
there's two different coins of this Asian Aryan thing where
yes, true.
here's the funny part. I was looking up, Kazakhstani and Uzbekistani women. Yeah, they're obviously, more Uzbeks and they're more Russians. So some of it might have that subtle Asian thing. But there's this woman by the name of, hold on, I just actually, her name is, she is a volleyball player from Kazakhstan, and she is only 20 years old. Her name is Sabina Altabekova,
Ah,
and
yes, yes.
she basically looks like an anime character. Have you seen this before?
My second daughter alerted me to her about 6 months ago. Yes, I have this. Yeah, I've got a mental image of her. Yes, and I agree. She does look like an anime character.
But here's the funny part. She's a Kazakh. She's a Kazakh
Yeah.
person, and basically there's no roots of the Chinese, Japanese. I'm not so sure about that from her. I tried to look in who her mom and dad were, but assuming
I
that,
think
yeah.
I think about during the Soviet period, just after the Second World War, I think about 2 million Koreans, ethnic Koreans from Siberia, were resettled into Central Asia by the Soviet Stalinist government. So you'll find a lot of Central Asians have got a lot of Korean blood.
Mm.
Yeah, so that's possible.
And that's where we're talking, going back on this neo-Eurasian, Asian Aryan thing, is that we have this one instance of Sabina looking like this beautiful mix between European and Asian, and it's wonderful, and it's like,
It sure
wow.
is. Yes.
And it's beautiful. It reminds me of like my mother's side, my cousin. She looks exactly like that, and so I can relate to that. Like it's my sister, and
Yeah.
so the thing is, we have to answer this definition of Asian Aryanism, or because it's like, are we talking about this future Uzbekistan Central Asian people, or are we
Yep.
really referring to this upcoming, European American Asians coming on these class positions? I think it's a little.
Yeah.
It's a weird. I find for the argument that it's more on the in American. I don't know anything about Central Asia. I think it's more of a hip and urbanite thing. I mean,
Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, yeah. Because I don't know what your opinion on Central Asia is.
You know, my mother is a product of those possibly more ancient sort of get-togethers of ethnic Russians and Asians, being half sort of Tatar herself. I think that this new development, this Western sort of uh, Nordic or Western European marrying Asians, I think this is actually quite a new development. I don't think
Yes.
we've ever seen anything, and and it's actually, yeah, it's very very yeah, it's very interesting, and it's got a lot of possibilities, and it could be the way going forward for sure.
Yes, yes, because yes, that's where I'm trying to get at. Where I think I
Yeah,
agree with you 100% that this is a recent new thing, and as much as I
totally.
like the Central Asian people, I hope more people like Sabina come out and she produces like 10 something children all looking like her. That would be
Yeah.
something more of that on. So yeah, it's an argument I've been talking with my friends about, but you're right. It's only happening where we are. But
Yeah.
in Japan, I think there was a huge talk about Okinawa or Okinawa, right? This
Yes.
was the
Yes.
island in the U.S. military stormed, and some of the U.S. soldiers stayed there. And there was this strange influx of white Japanese coming out of Okinawa. Even, I don't know, one of my Japanese friends who had, I think his father was like German or something, and he was from Okinawa, and he was telling me
Yeah.
this whole story between there was this weird white Japanese settlement in Okinawa, and the government was trying to suppress it, or at least try to rid them out by putting more Japanese there. But at the same
Yes.
time, in Okinawa, there's a lot of these mutts or bastard people that are on the island, but they have very characteristics as that Asian Aryan archetype, and it's just not really talked about. Do you know much of the whole Okinawa story, or?
I've only been down there once, and I, when I was there, I found quite a few people that look Western, but they don't speak any European language and only speak Japanese. These are the people that you might be referring to. Yeah,
Yeah,
very interesting. Yeah,
there is
very interesting.
this man that teaches the Okinawan language, and he doesn't know any English whatsoever, and he has a very English sounding name. I try. Okay, there he is. His name is. He looks. I have the picture of him. I remember watching him on NHK before. Oh,
Yeah.
Byron Fija, Byron,
Ah,
and he teaches Okinawan language, right? But
yes.
he teaches it to the Japanese, and he knows zero English. And yet, if you look at Byron Fija, he looks like a
Yep.
white American. Yet
Yep.
he says no. Well, my dad was certainly a white American, but I never met my dad. It's sad because he's a bastard child, but at the same
Yep.
time, he's using the Okinawan culture and language that's unknown and making this esoteric birth from it, saying he's a part of this people that's larger than life. And it's like, once again, there's
Yep.
another Asian Aryan connection there, or Eurasian connection.
Fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. Gee, that is so interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, I'm looking at the Japan Times article. It says he's Japanese, born to a white American father and a Okinawan mother, a couple who
Yep.
married. It seems to be, but he speaks to people. It's an interesting story, but yeah,
Yeah.
it goes on the topic of this. But change of subject. You write on the blog the Golden Russian, and that's supposedly just a blog now. From what I'm looking at your recent posts of just family life
Yeah.
observations and less about the Golden Russian. But what was the original point of your blog when you started it?
Um, I found that I was possibly in danger of giving away our funds trading strategy. So I sort of slowly tried to move away from the gold extraction, mining, sales to just something totally different. Yeah, yeah. I was kind of warned by my secretary not to. Who's actually my girlfriend, to not give away the funds um, positions because people can actually sort of attack the fund. So I just sort of had it more as a sort of a family life sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Because the
just like,
first article I'm looking is about skateboarding father and daughter, and you just talk about skateboards and how your daughters have skateboards, which I think that's kind of cute. It's funny, but yeah, that's. I never skateboarded. I always just fall. I'm kind of the. I was always afraid to fall off a skateboard. Not even biking, but they're cool
yeah,
though. Interesting skateboards.
yeah, no, yeah, that was the last one that I published. I think if you go to the very first article, I think it's more about me and my gold mining company that I founded in the hills out here just north of Melbourne, which actually sort of gave me my push into the finance community in Japan and China and Shanghai and all the bullion trading. But yeah, yeah, I was always into skateboards because I was one of those kids that got into Devo during a very bad economic period in the late 70s, early 80s. So yeah, no, I love skateboards. I still I still do all that stuff.
That's interesting. I mean,
It's,
I once again, I never really skateboard. I always was. I imagine like falling off of it, but I know two friends that
oh yeah.
skateboard. But that's funny though. I think it's more of like a fashion thing, bringing a little skateboard around, even though it has like this weird punk culture aesthetic attached to it. You know.
Oh look, like yeah, I don't think that I've actually skateboarded in Melbourne. I just take my board in just for show half the time.
You also have a piece about the Australian Racing Government Radio, and it's talking
Oh
about mongrels or about,
yes,
and then you said that you relating that to your family and how
yep,
that's kind of doesn't make sense because I think that's kind of clever because they say mongrel family history and then you look at your children are beautiful and it's like
yep.
they're not mongrels.
I'll tell you what, I'm currently engaged in a massive sort of Twitter fight on my alt account regarding this very question, and I've actually made a complaint to the Australian Human Rights Commission because actually calling someone a mongrel, and this is what Australian Radio National, that deems itself as being progressive left, has done. They've actually racially abused a whole class of people, including my parents, by calling people mongrels. But of course, they're in denial, and of course, they're attacking me on this other alt account. But it shows you that the leftists are often the biggest racists of all.
Mm. Yeah, well, it's like weird. I don't know exactly the use of mongrel, but it seems to me
Hmm.
that they're trying to at least I don't know Australian politics, but it seems to me that at least that it's mongrel as in well, like what exactly did they mean the word mongrel in?
Yeah, Magda Zubanski is a famous Australian comedian, and she's I think she's got Irish, Scottish, Polish, and Danish ancestry, and from that they deduced that she was mongrel. Remembering that mongrel is a word that was applied to half-caste Aboriginals and back in the slave days when they were used as black slaves. So I just found that to be very odd that a leftist radio station would call someone of European.
Oh, yeah, because they're
Yeah,
anti-white
yeah,
and they're assuming that all right. It's like that argument how the Irish became white by Noah Gaishiev, right? The ideal is that well, the white Irishes in America, they basically were assimilated with the elitist transatlantic English. This is because they were white by their skin color, but not black Americans because they were black. And
mm,
therefore, it's this ideal that you're a mixed race, but only whites are allowed. And this leftist radio
yeah,
station is calling you mongrel because you're no different from the mongrel black people you
yeah,
and it's like I could see this double where well, basically they're anti-white and then you're pointing out that
yes,
your own family are
correct,
beautiful because they're half Russian half Japanese and making them okay well that supersedes and shows you that white genetics is actually a good thing and that's basically
yeah,
what I'm saying coming from too with my whole Asian Aryan argument
exactly. Yeah.
where I'll mention this I think we have to mention this there's a subreddit called the Happa subreddit you know about it.
I've seen it very briefly, yes.
Well, I don't like to mention them, but I'm going to mention them anyway. I've been a lurker of it. It's basically was started by this guy named Eurasian Writer, Eurasian Tiger. He started a
Yes.
blog called Stuff Eurasian People Like, kind of like Christian Lander's Stuff White People Like. And in this blog by Eurasian Writer, he says that being half white and half Asian in the American experience is terrible. It's bad. You have identity issues. You should, and basically the answer to it all is just, kill yourself or just claim victim status and do pathetic things, right? And some people, and here's the funny part: the alt right, especially on the alt right Reddit, basically used his arguments to pretty much say, "Hey, don't race mix because you'll end up kooky like Eurasian Writer." And Eurasian
Mm,
Writer is
yeah.
giving ammo to say, "Hey, stay in your group. Don't go out and pursue an Asian lover." Yet at the
Yes.
same time, however, it didn't end there because Eurasian writer he started the Hapa Reddit as another way for half white, half Asian people to go on a Reddit and make complaints, right? And this is the liberal ideology, social justice warrior, anti-white
Yes.
coalition. And they
Yes.
basically are all Asian, half white, and they bitch about why they can't be Asian. Or it's basically a whole anti-white board. It's like you're Asian, but you
Yeah.
can't associate with your white side. And they call
Yeah.
Tila Tequila and Margaret Cho the bad guy because they like being associated on the white side. And so it's messed up. And so
Yeah.
I saw what was happening, and I knew two Asian girls in real life who were reading the Hapa Reddit, which I think was completely bad. That I think that's destructive and unhealthy. And so what that's doing is distracting from the movement, like what we're talking about, this Asian Aryan thing from happening, because liberal
Yes.
ideology is the enemy of not people self-actualizing and becoming Asian Aryan and being proud that they have white genetics, for a lack of a better term. But the point is that I assume that the whole Rappa headed board is basically around. I'm even thinking that Eurasian writer is some kind of troll. I don't even think he's a
Yeah.
serious person, or he's a mentally dysfunctional person who's just whatever. He just doesn't understand the bigger picture. And I declare
Yeah.
asian-aryanism as the enemy of the Hapa Reddit. So
Yes. Yes. For sure. For sure. No, I can see that. That's actually very interesting. Yeah.
I mean, certainly. Have you ever experienced, like, if your own daughters, or people who are half have identity problems or depression, or have you seen these things happen? Or
Um, in Australia, there's certainly been attempts by local sort of programmed just morons that are programmed by the mainstream media, just people in the street and stuff like that, to sort of cast aspersions as to my daughter's identity and what she should feel about herself, most definitely. But in Japan, my kids are accepted as being 100% Japanese,
oh yeah,
even though they're half Japanese. Yeah.
yeah, and I just don't. It's funny because this whole identity issue thing, it's only a matter of problems and depression if you just can't fit in. But if you find other people like yourself, and that includes if there's a group of half white, half Asian people who all congregate together, you're not going to
Yep.
have identity issues or depression. So it's silly, the
Yep.
argument, because they're
Yep.
looking for victim status, and they're looking to be a part of the anti-white coalition, this weird egalitarian victim status.
Exactly. Exactly. It's a big thing in the West to try and turn everyone into a victim.
Hmm.
It's really, really big, pronounced. It's promoted by whatever deep state entities, whichever country has within it. Yep.
Now I think I'm going to go back on the one article about the farm, the metropolitan philosophy. You were discussing about, Tokyo, and some things about a farm. It just shows a picture of
Yes.
that, and
Yeah.
it's kind of just a nice little article. You also, quote Martin Heidegger at the bottom, but I think it's funny that you said you said that your youngest daughter engages in her career as a professional model, where it's really
Yeah.
funny because I had a girlfriend. I'm still good friends with her. I met in undergrad school, and she wanted to be a model herself, and she was Australian Japanese. And I think it's
Okay.
funny because it's like, hey, is there something with Eurasian people or half white, half Japanese people that are just instant models? I don't know.
Yeah,
Is
I
they're
get
so
asked that
beautiful?
question. Yeah. Well, they're just such perfect sort of looking people, I think. Um, they're just, yeah. I don't know why, but my kids were actually asked to be models by people in Japan. It certainly wasn't pushed by either me or my wife. Yeah, people just came up to them on the street and just gave them business cards and said, "Look, free photo shoot." And then one of my kids became sort of internationally known, but she's completely unknown in Australia.
That's funny. Yeah, it's true. And I think positive things like that just show you that Eurasian people, half white, half Asian, are just beautiful people overall. It's just
They are.
amazing. Yeah, and that's another argument where they say that, you're a mutt or a mongrel if you're half right, completely contradicts that. There's this thing I remember I had a class in this where they told me that, in Korea, some of the Korean women there wish they were, I think it's South Korea. Some of the South Korean women wish they were white, like white Americans, so they'll go through eye surgery to make their
Yes,
eyes more rounder. And there's this whole
yes,
scandal in that business, in the Korean business, where they'll do anything to have Occidental features. Unlike in Japan or China, they don't really think about that much. But that
yes,
argument, the Korean argument, is often it's another anti-white argument because it assumes that why do they want to strive to be like white people so much when they
yes.
can just be their Korean selves? It's a strange thing that's going around liberal discourse.
True, true. Um, Koreans from the south can look quite Eurasian, and there's a reason for that. They may have intermarried with the people from the Ryukyu Islands who are Polynesians, so you'll find a lot of southern Koreans look very half, but they're not half at all. Yeah,
Mm.
so there's another angle as well. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe they're just trying to be like the southern, the ones from Jeju-do or something like that. Because when I was at Jeju-do, I thought that the entire island was populated by half Koreans, but no, they're full-blooded Koreans who are just different people.
It's weird because this is kind of a cliche. I mean, when I was in taking Japanese again at my undergrad school, it was all Korean. And that was kind of like my
Yeah,
first time with Koreans because there were Koreans
yeah,
learning Japanese, and they just
yeah,
thought it was so fascinating that I was like, "Oh, you're an American interested in Japanese. Hey, are you interested in Korean and Korean language?" And they would. It's funny because here's the funny part. Hanging around the Asian club, there's this cliche or bias that Japanese and Koreans don't get along that well, and I think it's kind of
yeah,
somewhat true, and I can have experiences for myself. And the point is that I really don't know much of Korean culture and Korean people because I've been around but at the same time, being exposed to Koreans in school is kind of strange, where people have divisions, yet at the
yes,
same time, it's I don't know how to explain it. I mean, I never really had Korean friends. I just had friends who dated Koreans, and
yes,
they were very similar to Japanese, but at the same time, both sides of the party are kind of like not
yes,
hostile, but they're kind of like, oh, I don't like that part. I even know a Chinese who just hated Japanese. 100% scoffed them off. It's interesting.
yes. Yeah, they share a lot of common history, the Koreans and the Japanese, but they both have different narratives of the same history. Yeah, various Japanese heroes are very, very much hated in Korea, but they're just as well known, if more well known in Korea than Japan, which I find very odd and funny.
The funny part is, in America, we have white, black, and Asian. I don't think I never met anyone who said, "Oh yeah, I'm Asian." No, someone says, "I'm Chinese, I'm Japanese, I'm
Yes,
Korean." It's
yes,
this weird thing where it's like, we talk about Asian American people. Do you go and say, "Oh yeah, I'm an Asian American person," but no, I have more benefits if I say I'm a Japanese American, or that
yes,
there's this. It seems to me that Asian is a good, okay terminology to describe Northeast Asians, but as well that I believe that it's good to say, be specific, Chinese or Korean or Japanese. But I've been trying to work around this. I don't know what you have to say about this, but if there was to be an Asian Aryan people or group huddling together, I would still
yes,
be okay with the ideal of Japanese, Korean, Chinese, but so as long as everyone acknowledges that they could possibly switch up with I have my own multiculturalism in some way. Their own, they
yes.
can interact with other whites, and whites interact with them, but they could still
Yeah,
have pride in those backgrounds. But as long as like this weird Americanism, allegiance to
yeah.
Asian Aryanism or some Eurasian thing.
I think you are 100% correct. When I was in Australia, when I was when I was in school, I was still deemed to be Asian, even though I've got blonde hair and blue eyes, because my mother was from Siberia. She was born in Siberia. So very often these classifications will be done for you. So so we possibly don't even have to worry about it.
Like I'm friends. Like here's a goofy thing. I I really like dating Chinese American girls. I just find them wonderful and fun to be
Yep.
around. But here's the funny part. Some of my Japanese friends or even guy white male friends are like, "You what? You prefer Chinese? What do you what do you the Chinese are like the worst of the Northeast Asians. You should be going high." I'm like, "No. There's so much China." I always tell reasons. Chinese are everywhere, and I tell them this good. But here's the weirdest part. It's like Japanese Chinese mix. Do you ever think about that happening? It doesn't, it's this dysfunctional thing that's often shamed upon. But at the same time, one of my arguments is, look, one of the best like gateway pleasures of Asian people understanding, I would say, is Chinese culture. Even though the language is not hard to understand. They come from the post Chinese communism. Their government is like you don't even know what's happening. I know Japan is much more friendly, but there's a lot of Chinese American girls who basically wish they were white American or wish they want to confuse both, and I think they deserve a lot of respect. And they have very similar backgrounds. But yeah, I would tell all my I tell always tell my white friends, hey, the best Asian girl. Whenever you say Asian girls, you're usually talking about Chinese American girls, really.
Well, yes. I think that the Chinese girls that I've dated in the past have actually been absolutely gorgeous and, in many ways, more westernized than the Japanese that I've known, to be honest. And the further north you go in China, the more Han-like their features are, and I find them almost indistinguishable from the Japanese anyway. I think racially they're the same. The Han Chinese and the Japanese are closer than the Koreans and the Japanese.
Somebody once sent a picture to me, and the picture said, in 1973, China proposed to give the USA 10 million Chinese women to boost the population.
I saw that. I, I think there's some truth in that. I actually saw in a Russian magazine the same article about a year or two ago. I think that may possibly have foundations in truth.
My brother, my older brother, really likes H.P. Lovecraft, and H.P. Lovecraft is kind of this,
Yes,
elitist horror writer, and he often talks about, he's a pseudo nationalist, racial aware writer. Nobody wants to talk about it, but such as
yeah,
his classic stories are basically about an aristocratic elite dying, and he often I forget the story, but there's this one story where all the people, like this one rich elite, falls in love with this woman from this mysterious East who's basically beautiful, but turns out their offspring are like fish people and ugly people, right?
yeah,
And basically, what happens is these fish people are basically alien elder things, and so what Lovecraft is really getting at is that there's this aristocratic party dying because it's shaking hands with these cosmic elites. That sounds very familiar if we're talking in the context of asian-aryanism. It gives certainly white nationalists to say, there's this chinkery, this gook race that's this weird, ugly people, going. But like we just said earlier, how Eurasian models are beautiful, that completely contradicts it. Now,
yep,
what I'm getting at is that in the lower classes in America, I think this is really funny, but racial mixing happens much more in the lower classes compared to the higher classes because the higher classes are gated
yep,
liberal elites, mostly like white
yep,
upper whites or even Jews.
yep,
Then there's a whole black underclass, but then there's this class of mutt people who are be like like the Irish. The joke in the
yep,
Irish is they're mixed whites, and so there's Polish, Italian, whatever. But now what we're seeing in the lower classes is that we're seeing, I know 3 guys at my community college who are dating Chinese girls, these very
yep,
homely looking, normal, like you would think, oh, this gook looking, ugly Chinese girls. No, they're perfect
yep,
wives, and they're
yep,
married now, and they're the 2 of the guys I know are gonna have children, and
yep,
you put them together, and you feel like no way that can happen, but it has happened, and so
yep,
as we're talking about Asian-Aryanism to the upper classes, where it might be from, the white businessman, his Asian wife, and he's getting economics, so much money and power, but we're also talking about these lower classes who are also
Yep.
getting those same benefits with Asian women. So it turns out that this is a class thing too. Asian-Aryanism is happening in the upper classes and then coming down onto the lower classes. And I think that's very interesting and something,
Yep.
again, akin to what Lovecraft was saying about this changing morphic people, or
Yep. I totally agree with you. I saw a meme about 6 months ago. Basically, it was a pro-white meme saying, "When you're white, there is no upgrade." But I think that is absolute crap. If it wasn't for my friends who married Asian wives, they would be already sort of on the downgrade by now. I think that no, I'm a big supporter of whites marrying.
you could say it's
I,
eugenics, a eugenics program, because people
I
say
think so.
it's eugenics or dysgenics, right? I think it's some type of eugenics too. I mean, it certainly has benefited a lot on that. I mean,
Yep.
the thing is, I'm all about you got to stable culture, right? I think it's
Yep.
dysgenics really happens when you support degenerate behavior, where it's basically if all this crazy stuff goes around, right? And then it's like if you play this extreme egalitarian, everyone shares all, and then what if a black person comes, right? And then he mixes in, and then there's this weird the Brazilian effect, right?
Oh,
Brazil
yeah.
has happened, and what has happened is the Japanese Brazilians were able to segregate themselves from the black Brazilians, and they've made their liberal upper class, and then all the lower classes were all dark and brown skin, and so
Correct.
that's another strange thing to consider, the Japanese Brazil and the darker races. And it seems right now America is heading in the direction of Brazil. And unless
Yep.
an institution like some kind of Eurasian Aryanism thing is to happen, then we can, tell these people to go on the path of the yellow pill.
Yep. Correct. I absolutely agree with you. I sometimes think that countries like Brazil have been fucked with by a certain sort of, I don't know, sub elite, and
Uh,
just to see what happens when you mix in sort of everyone and turn into a this sort of
yeah, it's unfortunate because Brazil, I think there still is like racial segregation in Brazil, but yeah, it's pretty mixed at
yeah
the point where it's chaotic and crazy. And it's just Brazil should be the answer to what this multicultural and diversity is about, and nobody really wants to
exact
say that.
exactly. I think that you're 100% correct in this for sure, without a doubt.
Now it's yeah, it's weird to think about that because I always think that when people we live in an era now that's completely post multicultural and diversity, or at least people are
Yeah.
with the election of Donald Trump, the failure of Hillary Clinton, you have all
Yeah.
these whites on the far left end who are protesting, and you have whites who are saying, hey, no, Donald Trump is a fine guy. What the heck are you talking about? He's nothing like Hitler. And so what's happening, and with the internet, there's this stage where we're getting post multicultural and diversity, post postmodernism, or the death of postmodernism in general. And so what's
Correct.
happening is that people are now accepting racial awareness and
Yeah.
institutions and some values which are considered, racist, sexist, whatever, as a good thing. And so
Yeah.
that means, Richard Spencer at NPI said, or at American Renaissance in 2010 originally said, we need a white ethno-state, and every single white person is going to have a little ethno-state somewhere in America. But there can also
Yeah.
be a black ethno-state and a Mexican ethno-state. Now, if
Yeah.
that's true, then obviously where are the mixed race people supposed to go? If you follow that
Yeah.
logic, there's going to obviously be some half white, half Asian ethno-state. And so, or at least a very small place right next to the white ethno-state. And
Yep.
so it's this go to your room nationalism, or like an image board becomes reality. And so
Yep.
there has to be some institution in the future to protect Eurasian people, or, at least be on their side. But you have, I think, entry for whites and even Asians that want to join in too, simply because it is mixed race. Like the thing is, I tell this all the time. I am not anti-white. I'm pro-white. I'm a white advocate. I'm as well as an Asian advocate. I believe that there should be nationalism for the
Yep,
self-preservation of the races on East Asia. Therefore, if
yep,
you have a healthy mom and dad, you're going to have a good child, and that child is like an Asian Aryan child. And so
yep.
I think if you're white and if you're on the Asian side, you can both come in, and so as long as you pledge allegiance to Asian Aryanism.
Yep, yep, I can see that. And that little community will probably be the most safest and the most intelligent and the most economically secure one of all the little communities. And I
I
think people will
mean,
break
are you
the law.
living the Asian Aryan place right now, or how do you define are your neighbors, Eurasian, or do you have how many friends do you have in your normal day to day you see that are in that interracial or at least a half a mix or
Only one family in Australia that I associate with, and that's about it. The rest of Australia is pretty much low grade. Well, to give you an idea, I think something like 85% of Australians supported Barack Obama,
uh,
and I think that about 80% plus loved Clinton to pieces. So it's that sort of. So Australia's a bit like a sort of dumb fuck California, kind of stuck in the South Pacific. So
uh,
no, there's very, very few people here that I associate with, if at all. I've got more friends in my town of Niigata in Japan than all of Australia combined. This is a pretty dumb fuck place.
uh, well, I look at it. I mean, when I go to game night on Tuesday night, I'm like the only person there, and like three of my white friends, they have like one Japanese wife and two Chinese wives. One's
Yep,
just got one's they're gonna have a kid. One they're getting married soon, and the other they're just girlfriend. I just think that's funny, and I'm like
yep,
but they're really secret about it. They're not yellow pilled on it. Like if you bring it up
yep,
about like, hey, it's funny, all you guys are socializing together and you all have Asian wives, and you'd be like, oh no, well yeah, we certainly like Asian culture, but we no in way associate with this kind of certain toxic identity. Like I think they're liberal, but it's like, guys, it's there, and it's like a group of seven
yes.
people in a room where it's like, come on, I just don't understand when that part happens, but it's there and quite evident.
I think they'll wake up eventually. I used to see a lot of that in Australia. A lot of my friends that were like that about 10, 15 years ago, they went back to their wives' country or Hong Kong or Japan, and they became like us, but over there. I think they'll wake up eventually.
Hopefully, I mean,
Yeah,
yeah. It's possible. I just think that maybe they need to write a book because I'm writing a book, and maybe I don't know what's the right message is. I think people like role models, or at least when you tell society tells you that it's okay, people will follow naturally. I think right
true.
now people are being told, hey, it's racist to ever think about race, so you should stop. But once this whole red pilling alt right thing happens, then I think that's the next step for people to actualize their destiny, right? It's
Yep,
people should like draw lines, right? And getting back into race again, notice we're not talking about blacks or Africans. We're only talking about the unique interests between whites and Asians in between and that mix. And that
correct.
means we have to draw a line and say, hey, we are only talking about us and we don't prefer the interests of blacks. We're not some Afro Asian
Yes,
thing going on. We're not the Kalergi plan in effect, because that itself is the multiculturally paradigm. And it seems to me
yep.
that it's like we got to make sure that it's only preservation for us and not them. We got to distinguish inside and outsider.
Look, I've never even heard of an Asian person marrying a black person.
Exactly. Yeah, you're
I've
right, but
never,
never heard
never.
of it either. Nope. I only knew one time. He was a Somalian, and he told me his story, but he was single, and he knew fluent Jap. I think his Japanese was probably better than mine, and he was doing it wasn't karate, it was something, and he was telling me his life story, and he said he never knew his dad because it turns out his dad was a Somalian soldier who raped a Japanese.
Okay.
And that's unfortunate. Greg Johnson from Countercurrents told me that the interracial between blacks and other non, blacks. It's always something to do with rape. I know that sounds like a super
Mm.
radical thing, but it's interesting to put this in the case of him, right? It wasn't a consensual thing. It was basically an aggressive. But the point is,
Yep.
this Somalian guy saying that he thought of the whole Shinto religion, or at least workout, as a meditation for his mind. So that's good for him. But at the same
Yep.
time, you're right. Afro-Asianism does not happen, or at least
I
black
think
and
that-
Asians zero. It's a
Yep.
liberal fantasy. I mean,
Yep.
I only bring it up is because one writer or one comic book artist, Andrian Tumine, who's Japanese American, he did a cover for the New Yorker showing a black male Japanese female with playing love locks in New York City for the New
Yep.
Yorker issue of January 2nd. And that's a fantasy, right? But white
Yep.
liberals in the New Yorker will say, "Oh, it's such a thing, it's going to happen." But I don't see. They should be talking about white Asians things happening.
Yep.
That's the crucial, right? And I just
I
don't
think they're
understand.
afraid of that.
I
I
don't know.
think they're afraid of that because it's something sort of so anti-Zog, this white sort of Asian thing. I don't think that they are able to control it.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because Mr. Tumine, he himself is Japanese white, and he wrote a book called "Scenes from an Impending Marriage." It's on my. I should read it and do a review of it. And this whole book is just him loving his life with Asian male, white female. That's great, Asian Aryan. But he's a part of the liberal elite, and he has to obey to the commands of the
Yeah,
multicultural thing. Oh, well, racism is bad, but no, this guy is a Asian Aryan. He's just doesn't know, and I think he's probably a fuddy duddy now too. But the thing is, it's close. He just needs to be yellow pilled. He can't be.
yeah,
I like using the word yellow pill, but still, I don't know what to. But back on the whole thing, you're right. Science shows, or at the current moment with statistics, it just doesn't happen with black. Not
no,
even not even Asian male, black female. Not even that.
no, no, no way. No, no. I think that one is actually sort of out of the question. Yeah, my wife's got some seriously sort of strident opinions about whether Asians should even be sort of associating together, partly because of the inherent violence of a lot of African societies. Have you seen the violence rates over there in Africa, and the rape and death?
Incredibly violent. I know, right? Africa is savage. I mean, when
Yep,
everybody refers to black people, they're literally monkey people, right? That's just a
yep,
primitive nature of blacks, right? And I think it's
yep,
a shame that black people should be in a society that's not built for them. And I believe they
yep,
deserve to have a society like Africa. I know right
yep,
now in America they're doing that with the inner city ghettos, but it's just making everything worse. And whenever whites come across their neighborhood, they get shot. And all
yep,
violence is done in black and white. And so I
yep,
would wish there'd be a new Africa so we can take all the African ethno state. I think they would all love that too. Hell, I mean,
yep,
there's the whole Black Panther comic coming out by Marvel telling black people that they're special. They need to be special so they can have their own black ethno state. Just put
yep,
Black Lives Matter, not say gives me that, but all should
yep,
state not for liberal elites, but for their own Marcus Garvey self-determination. That's my advice for black people. But once again, I don't like talking about the black issues because I'm not black and I don't want to be talking it. It's a game that I'd rather talk about white and Asians.
yep, yep. Oh, you'd love to talk to my wife.
Well, guess
You would
what? It's
love to
the
talk to her.
best kept secret is all my Japanese friends, everyone in Asian studies, don't like blacks and they keep it a big secret, right? I remember being at an Asian studies, party at school in college, just like everyone hanging out on the Friday night and everyone saying, "Oh, there's so many black people in Philadelphia. Why don't they just leave them? What to do about them?" I'll just put, and it's funny because it's like Asians are afraid of black people. There's no, it just
Yep,
it doesn't. But the funny part is, all Asians love whites, and the Asian people love white people who are just unapologetically white too. And it's funny. I don't know. I just think there's some synergy there. But
yep.
yeah, we definitely covered a lot and certainly talked about within the hour. Is there anything else you'd like to say about your future activities or what you plan on writing and doing in the future?
No, everything's on hold for the time being. I'm just sort of chilling here. If you ever want to chat again, or if you want me to sort of put you on to other friends of mine in Japan. Yeah, I'm
Oh,
always here.
awesome. I mean, I'm definitely, if you can put me up in some contact, at least speaking in English. My Japanese is very, at least speaking in English. And I would love to do podcasts with some of your friends who might know about some racial questions or at least culture
I'll
or
tell you
white
something
Asian
interesting.
culture
There's
wise.
something interesting. My wife speaks English fluently, and my girlfriend, who my wife knows about and actually has encouraged me to sort of have a girlfriend, she was actually born in Japan, but she's European, absolutely 100% European. So you might want to talk to both of them. They're fascinating people. And I've got some other friends in Japan. You'd love to talk to them.
Oh yeah, just hook me up with their names and just give it to me on Skype, and I'd love to talk to them. I mean, I
Yep.
guess I have one more question before I end the podcast there. Do you ever watch
Mhm.
NHK World?
I did. We can't get it in Australia, unfortunately, but yes, I did for quite a long time when I was living permanently in Japan. Yep.
It's funny. I watch it every day, and I swear I tell this to all my friends. I mean, you would think NHK World is like this fuddy-duddy like RT TV or like CNN, but if you watch
Yeah.
the NHK World entertainment program, the same people we are talking about, at least we're talking about either white males who speak fluent Japanese or married to a Japanese. We might be talking about half white, half Japanese people. But the point is, I think NHK World is a secret Asian Aryan institution. It doesn't
Yes.
mean to be that way. In fact, it's basically for Japan, right? Japan for the world. But all of their representatives are like half white, half Japanese, or whites into
Yes.
Japanese, or Japanese speaking one. And it's the perfect Asian Aryan thing, right? And they'll probably get mad if someone, the president of NHK World, hears this, but the point is, like, I love NHK World because I feel really at home watching the program, and it's just,
Yes.
oh my god, some
I
of the people, if you watch Imagination or just Great Gear, some of the guys are on, or just like the women, or was it Kawaii International with Mishima? She's a model, and she's Eurasian
yep.
too. Melody, Yoko, and but I follow them stuff on the Japanese Twitter, but take a look at it. It's just like I don't know if your daughters would be interested in that, but
I'll check it out for sure. I
Kawaii
think there
International,
is.
yeah.
I think the Japanese government is promoting a lot more intermarriage between the Japanese and whites. I'm sure that that's a thing, and it has been discussed between me and my wife and our friends over there. Yeah, I think that you've picked up on something for sure.
Yeah, I mean, some people, white nationalists, have been calling it Asianization, as if they're Chinese spies taking this and getting white genocide, and then having that might be somewhat true, but at the same time, my counter argument would be that it could be accidental, and basically whites can have more power over them, implying white institutions first, and then it becomes a dialogue between the two, then putting the whites on a wax museum, and then China existing or Japan, because Japan needs the interest of whites, or some. I think the Japanese are more like a fungus or some kind of like they want to subvert white culture, so they wish all whites become half Japanese, right? The
I've often thought of that myself. I think that you'll find, yeah, I actually agree with you. I've thought of that myself. Yeah, I think
Now
so.
the Chinese are opposite. They're like, okay, we'll get a Chinese maiden over there and marry him half white, half Chinese, but they're going to only support the their Chinese people, and
Yeah,
only you only can see Mao Zedong's grave if you're 100% Chinese, right? You can't go
yeah,
in there if you're not a part of the Chinese people, the great. And so the Chinese are much more elitist about who you belong to, and so they think
yeah,
the half bred, half white, half Chinese, they're only there to support China, but you're not
yeah,
effectively accepted. Unlike a half Japanese is accepted, and
yeah.
so that's a really strange dichotomy right there. And
Sure,
certainly
sure.
things are going to have to be changed around, or at least I'm very hopeful the Asian Aryan Japanese subversion is more effective than the Chinese spy thing. Because if China was to rule the world, I say this again, they'll just put everything on a wax museum and put white people as dodo birds. But then China will
Yeah,
just be the wall. But if Japanese, this whole classic William Gibson cyberpunk thing, everyone's going to be a living anime character, or this Asian Aryan
yep.
thing would actually realize, correct? And the Koreans, they don't care. The Koreans are just incredibly, extremely isolated. They never even thought about world. But I think the point is, I think we'll
Sure.
end the conversation by saying I'm very optimistic for an Asian Aryan thing to happen. So
So
it's
am
nice.
I.
It's nice talking to you, Alex.
Yeah, no problems. No problems at all.